All right, welcome everyone. It's Tad Hardway from Marketing for Hippies here with another point of view case study. And this time I'm here with Hilary from sleepatlast.com. And Hilary was in my mentorship program, had a health coaching background, but a penchant and an interest around this topic of sleep and why do we struggle with insomnia and not able to sleep, and as a real key component to health. And so we dove in properly around that point of view work, and I was very struck by her point of view, which is why I wanted to share her and her work today, because point of view in my sense is it's this kind of sense of like, here's what's really going on, here's what's really happening. It's the diagnosis. Here's what's happening underneath the hood. And you might go to the doctor with a certain symptom, but they say, oh yeah, that symptom over here is connected to this over here. I think about the story of Peter Goskew. He structural anatomist, and he had Jack Nicklaus, the golfer, come to him, and Jack had crippling pain in one of his knees, his right knee, and he was going to get surgery. But his friend said, look, there's a guy struck Peter Goskew. He could help you. Maybe just go see him before you commit to surgery. So I think reluctantly he went, and when he walks in, Peter Goskew looks up. He says, so Jack, so you've got hip trouble. And of course he's just like, oh wow, great, total quack. So actually, I'm in this excruciating pain in my right knee. He says, Jack, it's like, I can see you're in pain in your knee, but it's the source of your pain, but it's not the cause. The cause is your hip is rotated forward, putting all this pressure. And he had him do like half an hour of exercises right there, and then the pain was gone. So it's so much of what people are paying us for, in my mind, is a correct diagnosis, because they often come to us in pain, but they don't know why. And that's the hard part. The pain is bad enough, but it gets pushed over the edge when you just have no clue what's going on. And so that's what they come to us with, is I have these symptoms, and they've probably already tried some things, but those things haven't worked, and they don't know why. Because it made sense to me that would work, and yet I tried it and no real results. And I tried the things other people recommended. So people are just so yearning for somebody to have something solid to say, to have a map that actually represents the territory, that actually works, that gets them where they want to go, which is, of course, what I think is so central to most marketing is you're not making the case for them to buy from you. You're making the case for a certain approach and point of view. And so around Hilary's work around sleep, there were a few moments where she said certain things about what she thought these struggles we have with sleep are all about. I was so struck. I just sat back like, oh wow, I've never considered that as a possibility. So it's a real beautiful thing to come across a refreshing, unique, credible point of view. And so anyways, enough preamble. The thing that I suppose, Hilary, most struck me, and I remember this conversation where you said something about, this, our lack of sleep is really about this war on the yin in the world, this war on the kind of receptive principle. And the truth of it hit me so hard. I thought, that's so true. It's one expression of this much bigger something. So just for everyone listening, this is a really important thing, is a lot of, when we talk about articulating what we do, the word articulate means something about joints and how things fit together. And so that's one of the joints you can make, is here's the bigger cause, and you connect your work to it, and people can see how the micro and the macro connect. So that's a real beautiful thing about your work that I love, Hilary. Anyways, listen to me talk. Welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Ted.
I know you've got some slides. So my thought is, why don't we go through those images and the kind of visuals, and we can talk about it, and we'll just kind of.
Sure, that sounds great. Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here. And I thought I would just actually start with why I got interested in sleep before we look at the slides. It's because I had suffered with insomnia myself for a number of years. And it was really, I really felt what it's like. And I suffered with other kinds of sleep problems, but insomnia is the worst thing. And I would find myself obsessed about sleep and just really some 2 in the afternoon, I might start thinking, oh, am I going to sleep tonight?
Wow.
And
Wow.
and it would just be running in the back of my head. Am I going to sleep tonight? And usually the answer was not. And every once in a while I would sleep because I was just so exhausted. And it just went on and on. And I finally had an insight that just changed everything for me. And that was that my body had unlearned sleep.
Huh.
And it just came that I used to be able to sleep.
Right.
And I've unlearned sleep. My mind and my body's unlearned sleep. And because I'm such a learning junkie, that was really liberating for me because I love learning. So I thought, okay, that just means I have to relearn it and set about how I can do that. So I got excited about, as a health coach, really helping people with sleep because I really know what it's like to not be able to sleep, how fatigued you feel, how it just affects your whole life and your enjoyment of life. So I just wanted to start with sharing that personal connection to my topic of sleep. And so now I'll share the slides. I just have a few images to walk us through. Let me just find the right one. Okay, there we go. So you can see that?
Yep.
So the first one is just kind of an overview of my picture of sleep and
Oh, I like this.
how it fits together. So right in the middle there, you see this image, and I think of that as a nexus. So you have these arrows coming through. So I see sleep, and it kind of speaks, Tad, to your introductory story, a wonderful story about how everything connects to everything else. And when you just see something isolated and treat it in an isolated way, you're not really either able to really help, or else you might be missing a lot of things. So
Well, let's pause there.
yeah,
I just want to
yeah,
that's what
yeah,
you just heard from Hilary there's point of view. Of
yeah.
course, a very common point of view we would say in the holistic scene,
Mm-hmm.
but this notion that everything's interconnected and you can't just solve one thing without others, probably in the sleep industry, that's not necessarily going to be held. So this
No,
immediately is, here's a unique point of view.
thank you for the interjection. Yeah, it's a holistic view of sleep. So just as an overview, that's the middle part there. And I also see how sleep is connected to, helps us, reminds us of our connection to the earth and to nature. So the symbols at the top there are around that. And I'm going to go into also how I see different kinds of sleep needing different sorts of treatments. And we don't really hear that most of the time. And that can be very confusing for the consumers who's looking for solutions. So yeah, I wanted to start just with this what I call the nexus here.
Well, oh,
Yeah.
okay. So you're going
Or did you want to go back to that slide? You had some
No,
questions.
that's all right.
No?
Keep going.
Okay, great. So that's just the idea of holistic health. And so I think of it as physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual as well. And that sleep connects all of these components of health. And there's been a lot of research on what sleep does. And it's all just over the past probably 15 years, because sleep was more or less ignored for the most part. But what we mostly hear is physically. So I'll start with the physical. During the day, our bodies are busy, like transforming food into energy. And out of that, there's all these byproducts. And those byproducts get cleaned up while we're sleeping. It only happens during deep sleep. And you can imagine if you don't sleep, then you just get this accumulation of basically toxins in your body, and that is obviously creates chronic ill health.
Yeah.
And then specifically in our brains, there's, just imagine all these neurons, which are our brain cells, and at night there's an expansion between those cells. And there's a special system that was just discovered not that long ago and they call it the glyphatic system. It's like the lymphatic system, but of the brain.
Hmm.
And so that what's called intercellular space opens up and flushes out the toxins in the brain. So you hear a lot about sleep relating to, mental health, or sleep being, or lack of sleep being a problem related to a risk for Alzheimer's or dementia. And it's that lack of being able to flush out the toxins of the brain that is a huge component of that. And then of course the immune system is work, a lot of the repair part of the immune system also happens during sleep. So there's that that whole physical health that sleep is so important for, and you can't cut corners with it. You really need adequate deep sleep. Maybe I should explain what that means a little bit.
Well,
What deep sleep is.
yeah, before you do, let me just jump in here. Is
Yeah.
because I'm hearing one of the premises you have is, sleep is a need, it's not a luxury. That's one of the things that just hit me.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
It's not a, this is not an option. This is not a, because I think for a lot of people, they would say, well, sleep is, sure, I mean, yeah, that's important for your health, but it's kind of a, if you can do it, but there's no big consequences to not doing it. This isn't a need, like, oh, but yeah, there are certain things that our body actually needs, and if you don't have it, it starts doing harm. Yeah.
Yeah, in our culture, we sort of think of it almost as an option. It's like, oh well, I know I'll feel better if I sleep, but I could always have a cup of coffee instead, or something like that. But it's actually a basic need. So the basic needs like food and water. Those are, we all know those are basic needs. You're going to die without those things. Well, sleep is also a basic need. You would actually die without sleep. And so
my understanding is you would die sooner than without a lack of food.
yes. Yeah, exactly. So sleep is like super important. And because it's so important, our body does make sure it gets sleep. Even if we don't sleep very well, our body will go into like micro sleeps to get enough to survive. So, but we don't want to just be in survival mode. Like survival mode is just keeping things ticking over. If you want to live in a healthy way and optimize your health, you really need to get adequate sleep. And lack of sleep is associated with all kinds of cardiovascular diseases, like stroke and high blood pressure. It's associated with type 2 diabetes. It's metabolic disease, being overweight. There's a lot of chronic diseases associated with lack of sleep. So it's super important to sleep well. So not to spend too much time on the physical, moving along on this diagram to the mental part. During our sleep, especially during REM sleep. So I was going to describe different phases of sleep to really understand this. So when we go through a night, we typically would go through several phases, or several cycles would be a better word, of phases of sleep. Yeah. And so light sleep is when you're sort of just falling asleep and you could easily get woken up, and it's called phase 1. And then phase 2 is a little deeper. And then phase 3 is the deep sleep, where if you were woken up, you'd be really groggy and exhausted. So that's a deep sleep when our body's really repairing itself and detoxing. And then of course there's the REM, that's the dream sleep. So that's where our mental health is really improved through, and in fact it's vital to our mental health in a number of ways. So our memories are consolidated during that time. So we think like sleep is where our bodies just sort of conk out and nothing's happening, but there's so much happening in our brains and in our bodies during sleep. And in our brains, there's this amazing thing going on of the neural connections are being pruned and consolidated, and memories are being transferred from short-term to long-term memory. And who knows how that all happens and gets coordinated. It's really miraculous, I think. But it's really critical, and that's one of the reasons if you don't sleep well, people notice that their memories they have poor memory, that it's harder to concentrate, all of those sorts of things, because your brain is not doing that function that's so important. And it's also important for innovation and creativity and problem solving. So when you lose sleep, you also find it, you just don't perform as well, you're not as effective. And over time, that can create more serious mental health issues. So it's associated with depression, for example. Sure. A chronic lack of sleep is associated with depression. So you have to dream. It's important to dream and to sleep for our mental health. And then also during that REM is our emotional health. And I've heard it described as going to therapy overnight, with your dreams, because what's happening is we're processing our emotions. We're processing events of the day that are emotionally significant, and kind of just making it okay to carry on. So that sense of, when you wake up and you feel refreshed, you might have had a very, stressful day the day before, and then you wake up and that sense of, oh, it's a new day, and that sense of possibility that you can have in the morning when you wake up is because our brains, our emotions are being processed during that sleep time. And so it's super important for, just emotional regulation as well. Just, having an even mood and being able to handle what comes your way during the day is part of what sleep allows you to be able to do. So we to your point about, thinking sleep is optional, sometimes we might think, oh, it's so important that I get such and such done. But actually we're less productive when we don't sleep the right amount. So even though, we're so obsessed with doing things, which I'll say more to it about the Warren Yin component of what I'm going to say, it's actually better for our ability to accomplish and to be effective and actually just enjoy life as well, to have sleep.
Isn't that, it's amazing the irony of it. We think, well, less sleep, I can be more productive. But even by those metrics, which are questionable as the only metric to use, even by that metric, by taking naps, by getting a good sleep, we're actually much more productive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a much better strategy. I mean, the odd kind of, hour or 2 hours off is not the end of the world, but doing it as a chronic, sort of constant way of getting through life is very detrimental and really and actually dangerous. Yeah. So then the other one is spiritually, and that might be, people might go, well, spirit, what does she have to say about sleep and spirit? So I mean both in the term the human spirit, that human spirit, the humanness of us, and also that notion of mystery as well. So in both of those ways, I would say that sleep is important. So around the human spirit component, two very concrete examples are our will, our will and our willpower, our ability to be motivated to get things done is really compromised with lack of sleep. And this, there's been a lot of really interesting studies about sleep and lack of sleep and ethical and moral decision making. And lack of sleep is really correlated with unethical decision making. And it's partly, I mean, there's a lot of components to it, but it's partly due to what there's a model called the ego depletion model, meaning this sort of sense that we have certain amount of resources at our disposal, sort of mental resources or will resources to use, and it gets kind of exhausted. And if we don't sleep, we don't have that sense of resourcefulness. And that can just be something like, you get up in the morning, you didn't sleep well, and you could take for breakfast, you could go for the donut or the egg, and you're more likely, if you're kind of if you prefer the donut, you're more likely to take the donut, right? So it's like your will power is lower when you don't sleep as well, or you don't sleep
Yeah.
as much either. So it's very important to that sense of just accomplishment and doing the right thing. I think it has um, huge implications on our society when you think of the link to sleep and ethical decision making. There's so many implications for that, and there's been a lot of interesting studies on the link there. So another area of the human spirit is empathy. So we actually are less empathetic when we don't sleep as well, or we're lacking sleep. We're less able to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and imagine the world from their perspective. And we also have, our moods are affected. So we might, there's the ability to be empathetic, and then there's the desire to be empathetic. And with lack of sleep, both of those components are less available to us. So, and then I'm not going to talk too much about the mystery of sleep, of the spiritual part. That's kind of the mystery part. But sleep is the domain of our subconscious mind, and there's something going on there. I've already spoken to, how our emotions are processed, but I personally think there's a lot going on in our subconscious mind that we can have access to through our dreams. And we need to sleep for quite a long period of time, considering, like almost not a third of the day, but, almost that. And there's a lot happening there during that time.
What strikes me when you were speaking about the empathy piece is you're saying if, sleep is like having therapy, where does people's empathy come from? People's empathy comes from being on the receiving end of empathy.
Yeah.
That's what gives birth to empathy, is you get listened to, and that felt good, and so then you give it to others. And so kids have to be on the receiving end of empathy from their parents to really learn what empathy is, and have that modeled to them. So it just struck me that, of course, if whatever it is that's giving us this empathy, that's helping us sort through our day, if we're not on the receiving end of that, how could we ever be on the giving end of it to anyone else?
Absolutely. Yeah. And the more I just think of, say, an organization where, there's an organizational culture, and I come from an organizational development background. And so there can be sort of a drive to just perform, and be sort of bleeding into the whole Warren Yun part of it. But I guess I'm passionate about that perspective on it. But, people can feel pressured to not sleep, or compromise their sleep at any rate. And then decision making is really compromised, and empathy, being the receiving end of empathy is compromised as well. So there's so many ways in which our humanness is connected to sleep.
Okay.
And I love that.
Yeah, I just want to pause, because so that was just a little point of view nugget that Hilary dropped. I want you to hear about. There's something about, can you really be fully human if you don't have sleep? There's some connection there that without sleep, our humanity becomes in question, or some, at least an achieved understanding of what it means to be a human being. I hear, but also the thing I want to say about this visual, to kind of step back a bit for everyone, it's so important. This is something I've been really realizing is point of view, particularly the map portion of point of view. I have this point of view pyramid in my mind anyways, of you got 3 levels of it, and the tip of it is, these are the some branches just fell from a tree. The tip of the pyramid would be the route, the kind of sequence, the steps, the A, B, C, D, E, then below that are the kind of the core principles, and that would be maybe 30-40% of it, and then 60% of it is this map. And the map has to be visual. The maps are sort of, well, I don't has to be. but let's just say for shorthand, it's real easy, especially in an era of internet and everything, that the maps are visual, can be pictured, can be an image of some kind, that people should be able to look at the image and see the whole thing there. Now, they may not understand it all, it may have to be explained to them, but then when they look at it, it all reinforces everything in it should make sense. And so, and if it's the wrong image, it jars people. If the image doesn't work for the way you're describing it. So what, works about this when you got the arrows coming in, so you see, oh, there's a nexus point. But here's the thing I'm thinking about this is, because I'm seeing that it's almost like a two-way thing with the arrows. I'm imagining, if your physical health is compromised, that will compromise your sleep. If your mental health is compromised, that compromise. But also, if your sleep is compromised, so in some way, I could see a redoing of this with the arrow going both ways somehow.
Yeah, and they could actually even be connected. Like when you were saying that, I was thinking even of a sort of infinity loop as well, because they're all connected to each other as well.
And it's possible it could be a Venn diagram, but there is something about there's in a Venn diagram, you kind of, this is why it's, you sometimes I'll bust my head, like, what's the right visual for this? Because what doesn't work for me about a Venn diagram in this is, Venn diagram tends to say this plus this plus this plus this equals this. So all these things contribute to this, but you don't get the reverse motion.
Mm-hmm.
This feeds the four circles.
Mm-hmm.
The center is just the accumulation of all those circles. Whereas in this case, we're saying, no, sleep is its own thing. It's its own force. It's and so it has a relationship to these things. Yeah. We're not saying sleep is just that if you have good physical, spiritual, emotional health, you get good sleep. We're also saying the inverse. So to me, that isn't completely captured in this visual.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. I think that it's certainly, these are all a work in progress of the visuals, because I had worked with you on this last summer, actually, like really articulated these things, and they'd all been floating in my mind, through all my various different learning interests and stuff. But to pull them all together and to make them coherent and make them like actually just say what I really thought and put them into words was a great first step. And I also tried to put it into one image as well, which maybe I'll get to, but sure. But I do see this, that finding the right image as part as a new component of my being able to communicate this stuff. So yeah, I agree with you. I'll probably need a graphic artist to really get what I want to say.
It's worth it just for everyone. It's worth, you just doodle these things. You get a pen and paper and you just start fiddling of, what am I trying to, and does this image say it? Does the image itself communicate? Because, for example, if you put it as a pyramid, well, a pyramid has certain implications. The thing at the bottom is foundational. It's the most important part. And the tip, well, that's very small. So it's maybe and
it's also the apex. Yeah. So it's like thinking, what does that symbol convey as well?
Bingo. Yeah. It's steps. If it's a series of steps. Yeah. Well, steps implies sequence and progression.
Yeah.
If it's a spot, this was for me with coming up with the visual for the niching spiral. Because the thing I realized is that people look at niching in that linear way, where it's island problem. You have no niche, you want a niche, and it's a linear thing, and then you figure out your niche and it's done forever. But of course, I saw most of my colleagues would figure out a niche and then change it, and that seemed to be part of it. And it seemed to be helpful to you make a decision and then you honed it. So I thought, well, maybe it's more of a circle, and I worked with that for a while. But I realized it didn't work, because it's like, wait, but in a circle, then you're right back where you were. But people aren't back. It's like something has changed. So then the spiral image came and said, you go around and then you take a step in, and then you go around, but you're another step in. So yes, you're north again. You're at that original point direction-wise, but something has changed. And so as soon as I hit on the spirals, that's it. That's the thing, when people can see it, it's easy to explain. Because if I did the circle and I say, and then you're back here, but it's better. And they look at it and they say, but you're just back at the same place. No, but it's not the same place. But no, it is the same place. You'd have that, and they'd be right, because the image wouldn't have captured it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also helpful to have someone else look at it and say, oh, this is what I see, just like you did.
Oh,
And I'm
yeah.
like, oh yeah, those arrows should be in
Yeah,
that direction too.
doodle
So
it and share it with
yeah,
people, for
yeah,
everyone. And
yeah.
just, how does it does this make sense? Does anything not make sense? And sometimes you'll do it, it's not an image, but it's like, a metaphor. It's like, oh, it's like this person on island A, they want to be on island B, and here's a boat.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
you want to show it and say, does that make sense? Is there any holes in this? And then they might say, yeah, there's no captain on the boat. Oh, right. I gotta, right. Do
I
they have
bet.
a map? Do they have a compass? Do they have, oh, yeah, those are some. You start to add these things out, and it becomes richer, and you'll find out if it doesn't work. And if it does work, you'll find ways to add nuance. And, because if you look at a medicine wheel, to me is a great example. You got these 4 quarters of a circle,
Mhm.
and there's a level where it's just like, oh, 4 colors. That's the most simplistic level. But then, of course, if you go into each of them, well, there's a direction, there are animals associated, there are plants associated, there's a stage of life associated. And for all of those, there are stories and songs and rituals. So it's the whole of life can be found in this thing. So it's not that you need an image that's so crazy complicated, but it might have a lot in it the more you work.
Yeah, a lot packed in it. Well, another thing I need to build into the image here is the notion that health is more than the absence of disease. I see,
Sure.
like, we often think of it as just the absence of, but it's, sort of like just being status quo is fine. And then there's, being unhealthy. But I think of health as a vibrancy and in all these dimensions, sort of vibrantly, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually alive would be how I would describe health. I think that's probably why I chose a circle. I like circles in general, but anyhow, that needs to be embedded in that thing. But also the other point that you made is that health isn't just about sleep. The sleep is a huge component, but it's also nutrients and movement, rest, community.
And so it's interesting when you're saying that, just for the people listening, health is about all these things. So with physical health, there could be a Venn diagram there.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be one of those things like, let's talk about physical health. You flip the flip chart paper, and here's a Venn diagram of all the things that I see going together to create health.
Yeah.
So there can be visuals within visuals within visuals.
For sure. Yeah.
Let's keep going.
Okay. And then just the other component I wanted to make about this is just how much our sleep is compromised from a health perspective. So it's and chronic disease as well. So which of course sleep is related to. So a huge number of people, I think it's 40% in Canada and 60% in the US, are have at least one chronic disease. To me, that's absolutely shocking. That would be the case. And then our sleep is it's between 30 and 40% of people get poor sleep. And that's a huge number, amount of the population when you think about it. So I wanted to move to a new visual to talk more about our connection with the earth. So I'll explain why I've chosen this visual in a second, but I see sleep as reminding us that we're part of nature. Mm. And for one thing, every organism sleeps. Every living thing sleeps. Mm. Has a phase of activity and a phase of rest, or even like single-celled organisms have that, which is really incredible. But just the fact that we sleep, that we have this daily cycle, we don't really think about it. It's just, that's the way it is. But when you think about it, it's related to the earth, the how we experience light and dark, day and night, as that 24-hour phase, right, that we live through each day. And it's hard to not talk about it by just saying a day, but just the rotation of the earth on its axis and our activity, and not just us as humans, but just about every living thing most organisms are connected to that 24-hour cycle. And so it's called our behavior, that the way we structure our time is called circadian rhythm, the way we structure time according to that 24 hours. And it's so encoded in us as beings on the earth to live in that way and to have that kind of a pattern. And, it's how we structure our time, but also every single cell in our body and every organ in our body is circadian, meaning different things happen according to what time of day it is.
Got it.
So it's like such a fundamental part of our whole self, our whole well-being, our whole existence. And I'm just a real nature lover, of course, having seeing it this way. But we've in our society we've forgotten a lot about how we're connected to the earth, and this is just like irrefutable. It's just like,
of course,
we are earth beings.
Let me just see if I can jump in here. So you walk us through the image, just what each part of it is, what it represents, why you chose it like this.
Okay, well, I chose it because to me it represents the two phases of those circadian rhythms. So the yellow being the sun in daytime, and then the blue being the moon. And also I have this metaphor in my mind about sleep and water. And
is that what the blue lines are?
Yeah. And so I think of sleep as the more the higher quality of sleep that you have. Like if you go through a good night's sleep, when you're talking, we'll say we had a deep sleep, we had a good night's sleep, we really slept. So the more quality sleep we have, the deeper the sleep. So to me, that brings that water metaphor. So I think of it as an underwater thing. And to me, water also represents like that, the subconscious mind. And so I'm weaving a lot of water images and metaphors into my picture of things.
Is that why the moon is under the water there in this image?
Yeah, you could say it's reflected in the water. It depends how you want to look at it. But it's to me, this image is about that circadian rhythm. It's about those two phases of our existence: the phase of daytime and sunlight, and the phase of nighttime. And then the waves are the idea of sleep and the unconscious mind, what's going on in our bodies that we're unaware of.
Okay, and then the sun is bigger because we spend more time awake than we do asleep?
No, it's just bigger because we see it bigger. I think that's less. I wouldn't put a lot of meaning in that, other than that, we see a big sun and a smaller moon, and that's kind of the way those two things are usually presented. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, to me, it would make sense because we do spend 16 hours awake and 8 hours asleep, roughly.
I should ask you what you see in it, because that would be helpful. You're seeing that in it, so that's interesting. Yeah.
That was the initial thing.
Yeah.
Right. It's
okay. Okay. Cool.
But it's good. So this is a great example of using a visual to communicate a point of view. That there's a lot in the image. As Hilary's walked us through. So just to consider this from your own point of view, what's an image? What's an iconography that you could use where the whole thing is there? This relationship between the two, because also it's an old workshop facilitation trick. I remember I read a book, and it said when you're teaching a workshop, you'll draw something or whatever on the flip chart, and one thing is you could flip it over, but then it vanishes. People can't see it anymore. So they said it's much better you take it off and you tape it on the wall. So by the end of the workshop, all the walls, are covered with these things, but that allows you to then refer to things, which keeps deepening their understanding of that image, because you'll come back to it from another angle later. You'll say, oh, here's a story that represents this, you know, and so that image becomes more storied, more nuanced, better articulated, better connected to everything else. So by the end of the workshop, they'll look at the same image, but they'll see more. You know, because at the beginning they walk in, it's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything to them, or they can make some guesses that they probably be wrong. Whereas at the end, yeah. So it's not that point of view is here's an image, now forget about it. Here's another image. There's going to be a weaving that happens, and at the end of it, they get a real whole picture gestalt of the thing, and the images become the reminders. They become doorways into what your point of view is, rather than just writing out essays and putting the essays on the wall, which is, sure, that would be your point of view, but you know, an image is worth 1,000 words and all that. So let's move on to
brings up the whole thing. So just a few more things about circadian rhythms is, of course, sleep. Yeah, go ahead. You wanted to.
We need to move on, just time wise.
Yeah, sure. Okay, sure. Yeah. Okay, so so the image also kind of links a little bit to this other image. So to your point, and that is, of course, the yin and yang symbol. And so when I was, you know, just thinking about all these, you know, sleep and night and darkness and all of these things versus light and daytime and etc., it really brought the yin yang symbol to mind. And they're just, the notion there is these complementary forms, elementary complementary forms that need to be together to form a whole, and requires a balance. So so that is where I started to think about this notion of, well, here we go, just that sort of idea of superimposed over night and day, and I talk about yin time, you know, as time for sleep and rest, etc. But then it brought into this notion of war and yin. So this is a little bit, this really needs some work, this image, but the idea is that, and you started our talk with this, is this, when I really brought that image of yin and yang together, I started to see how everything that our society represents is very yang. It's that activity and light and productivity and doing and all of those kinds of things. And it's like gobbling up the yin, or trying to, you know, there's very little time in our world for the yin stuff. So the yin, yeah, sorry.
Let's just hold on this just for a second.
Yeah.
So one thing that this brings up is sometimes we bust our heads trying to find out, oh, what's an icon? What's an image? What's a picture of this? And it already exists. You know, like somebody else has already done it, but we think, oh, we couldn't use somebody else's image. But sure, we can. You know, there's, you know, of course you should do it respectfully, and if it's required to check in with people. But for example, Bill Plotkin, he wrote a book called Soulcraft, which is a beautiful book, and a few books, but he has this image, which is probably not original to him, certainly, but this notion that there's this tree of life, and the branches are the kind of spiritual transcendent, the trunk that's the upper world, and then the middle world is where daily life happens, and in the roots, that's the soul, that's a different world. So he makes a distinction between the three, and I was talking with a woman in the UK, and her work was clearly about these three, and said, well, what about that image? Oh, yeah, but it's his. And it's, well, you can say, look, I got this from Bill Plotkin. You can credit him and source him, and you can tell, you don't have to pretend you made it up. So just for anyone who's feeling like, oh God, there's a perfect image, but somebody already has it. Well, yeah, you can use it, but then you also come up with your own spin on it. I mean, I've never seen this, like little tiny parasite whale yang.
Yeah, I gotta get the tail in there, but it's yeah. So this notion of the war and yin, it's you start to talk about it at the beginning, is that, you know, we're fighting back, or those of us who see it this way are fighting back, you know, environmentalism, gender equity, race equity, all of these things, and in holistic health are all fighting back on, as I see it, against that sort of yang dominance thing. And the reason I chose that term, War and Yin, is it's as you mentioned, it pulls all these pieces together, and it speaks to this notion of it's beyond sort of your belief system. It's like this, you need a balance. Life needs a balance of these two complementary, opposing energies, and without it, you get disease. And so that's what we see in that imbalance between the two. I mean, you wouldn't want an overdominance of yin either. You just want a balance between the two.
What, and just to pause here, what's so important, what Hilary just said is, okay, so when I talk about the point of view pyramid, there's this kind of the steps, there's the principles, there's the map, but the whole pyramid is on a territory, and that territory is real. It is not abstract. It's actual land that the actual pyramid is sitting on, and the pyramid, the whole thing, your whole point of view has to testify to the land. What is your map? Your map is an attempt to map out actual territory. It's not an idea. It's not abstract. And in fact, when people come up with, this is where people get dangerous. They come up with theories that have no basis in reality, because that's how they think life should be. You know, this is the best diet for everyone. Why? Because they have some political axe to grind or some spiritual belief about something. And so then they push a diet that is actually, if you did the tests on people, you'd find out this is really damaging to folks to eat this way, but it's pushed for some other reason. And so the map has to match the territory. When we're doing a map, you're testifying to something. A map is not a prescription, it's a description. A map is saying, this is how it is. And so this is what's so potent about Hilary's use of the yin yang thing. She's saying, well, no matter where you look in nature, in the real world, in the actual world, this is how it is. Everything rests. When anything is prevented from resting, here's what happens to it. So you're not hearing an opinion fest. And when we're talking about the map, this is so important. To the best of our ability, the map should not be an opinion. It should just be testimony. It should just be reportage. Here's what I saw. This is what the evidence seems to say. It's not, and therefore it should be, or, but I really think it's just that. And that's why it's the base of the pyramid, yeah? Because everything else will now build on this map. So if you get the map wrong, so for example, if this yin yang thing, you said, well, you know what? I really think the feminine is the best thing. So I'm going to make the feminine bigger, and I'm going to, you know what I'm saying? Like, that would be an opinion. But of course, what, you know, this yin yang symbol, you imagine this must have come out of hundreds of thousands of years of a culture observing. And then it suddenly
5,000 years old, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So then it comes in one day, it comes in an image, somebody writes it down, shows a friend, and they look at it and they say, oh, that's good. Yeah, the whole thing's there. So the map has to be honest. It has to be reliable. People got to be able to count on it as accurate. And then this, you know, then what Hilary's done is said, but sure, it's in nature, that's the way it is. But in this culture, it seems to look different. And it seems to look like this, where one's eating the other, one's attacking the other. There's a war of one on the other. And again, that to me lands as accurate testimony, you know, which is why when she said it the first time, without an image like this, but when she said it, I just thought that is true. I see that as well. It's not just a war on sleep. It's a war on all kinds of rest. It's a war on any kind of replenishment at all. It's a war, all these things that we would maybe associate with the yin, all of those things are being attacked concurrently. It's not just sleep. So anyways, all that to say, I just think this is brilliant. I love it.
Thank you, Ted. So linking it to sleep is that we've internalized the war on yin. So we're part of a culture, and we have, you know, whatever beliefs we have and orientations, but despite it all, it's the place, it's you know, it's the water we swim in. So we've internalized a lot of it, and it impacts our sleep. So the degree to which we insist on being productive all the time, that we can't rest, that we worry, that we're stressed out, that we are not able to wind down, that we can't indulge. Even I use that word, indulge, in self-care. So even that word, there you go. We can't just enjoy self-care without it's considered like a guilty pleasure. All of that is a kind of internalization of that war and yin, which impacts our sleep. So there's not just, all the pressures in our lives that make it difficult to sleep, which I could go on and on about, but also the fact that we don't tend to value our own sleep that much.
And what's so powerful about this that I'm hearing in the map, and again, that could be a Venn diagram or a concentric circle. There could be here's all the factors that prevent us from sleeping. But then again, visually, I'd be like, well, how does this internalization, where does it fit in the image? Is it a foundational piece? Like, is it a pyramid? Is it a Venn diagram? Is it steps? What is it? But what to me is so potent about this is you're hearing the point of view is like, look, even if you tend to a lot of those other things, you close the shutters, you put on the face mask, you meditate before you go to sleep, or you try to relax. There's something of that. What I heard in this, I remember the first time, was this: if you do all those things, but still some deep bias in your psyche is that it's wrong to rest, that resting is less good than productivity, how are you going to let yourself sleep? How can you do it? You can't let go, because what are you letting go of? Something really good for what? For something useless. And then that's the drama every night. That's the way I heard it.
Yeah. Which
to me is such a profound, it's not just I got to get the app and the sleeping aids and the melatonin. And it's not this. It's, wow, could it be that the reason I don't sleep is because I think sleep is an indulgence?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, there's that internal and external pressure. So I want to make sure I show you a few other images here, because I think I would like people to see this. So there's a lot of information out there about sleep, and do this and you'll sleep, and that and you'll sleep. And I've come to the conclusion that you actually have to know what kind of sleeper you are to be able to use any of that information. So there isn't really time to totally unpack this, but I just want to make the point of there being different types of sleeper that need different fixes. And again, the way you look at this, of course, there's the waves and that idea of depth. So at the bottom is the deep sleeper. So the bottom part of this model is the super sleeper, the one that sleeps very deeply. And that would be how we just naturally would have slept, pre-industrialization. Not all the time but just generally, right? So we wouldn't have had a diagram like this before. And then what we call normal is not a super sleeper. So because of all of these things that we just discussed, that internalization of war and yin, the conditions under which we sleep. And then there's these different kinds of poor sleepers, which I call erratic, disturbed, and hypervigilant. And I don't really have time to unpack it because I know, because I want to get to there's one more diagram I want to share with you about fixing it.
Offer one reflection on this one is, first of all, okay, so just for everyone, point of view wise, in terms of visually representing these things, what's really great here is the visual of you going down in depth. And so the one on the bottom, this is the kind of the deepest one. So that's very handy visual, because if she'd done it the other way, imagine, well, the super sleeper's on top, but wait, I thought you were talking about deep sleep, and doesn't deep imply down? Yeah, but never mind, let's move. This actually, it's just, you don't want to confuse people. You don't want to jar people. Everything in the image should reinforce. So the other thing is, I could see each wave being different. Like the super sleeper, a real thick wave. The other one, the average, a little less thick. The erratic, I could see that being a spiky kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Disturbed sleeper could be broken up, like it dashes.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Yeah, thank you.
And the hypervigilant sleeper could just be a bunch of exclamation marks in a wave. I don't know. There's or eyes wide open, or
Well, I like that you just got it. Like just
hey,
seeing those words, that told me a lot. But when you're talking about how to shift the image, I could see that just those words in the image itself.
cool.
You get it, so that's really cool.
All
And
right,
then the final image I want to share is what I call the 5 elements of great sleep. And so this is a star, and these are the components. And depending on what kind of sleeper you are, you would need to focus on different components.
Hilary, can you scroll it down a bit? Because it's just, at least for me, the video is
Like
covering
that?
the other corner. Down.
Like that way?
Down further.
Down like
Oh,
that?
sorry, up a little bit.
Okay.
Perfect. That's great.
That's good. Okay. So just to quickly connect that with the type of sleeper. So most of us, I'll start at the sleep conditions. That's just that things like you would be able to sleep in a dark room, for example, as an example of a sleep condition, and lack of noise, those sorts of things. And you get a lot of advice, like sleep tips are like that. And they're great for what I call the normal sleeper. The person isn't yet a super sleeper. They're not sleeping optimally, but to get to optimum, they could follow those tips.
Yeah.
So having the right sleep conditions is really important. And it's like dark and cool and quiet. No TVs in your room, no gadgets in your room, things like that. And then another thing that you get is sleep habits. And that one I link particularly to the erratic sleeper, because the erratic sleeper is someone who is not sleeping consistently. And they're basically screwing up their circadian rhythms that way. So you do also those tips that you read about, which is called sleep hygiene. You read about some of those sleep habits, and a lot of it is about being consistent and really protecting your sleep. So those are pieces of the puzzle, and if you're a certain kind of sleeper, they can particularly help you. And all of these are important. But moving along to sleep confidence, and for some of you, what's sleep confidence? What's that? Well, what I call the hypervigilant sleeper, the one who's the insomniac, the hallmark of that is lack of sleep confidence and really feeling like you don't know how to sleep anymore, or something's happened to you, something's wrong with your body, everyone else seems to be able to sleep and you can't. So you need to have sleep confidence, but it's a catch-22, because you try these sleep hygiene things that you read about, and they don't solve the problem. Solving the problem for that hypervigilant sleeper is more training the body-mind sleep system. And the body-mind has forgotten how to sleep or unlearned sleep. And so it requires that retraining of it. And that paired with seeing the change generates confidence over time. And then you overcome that inability to sleep. So all of those, all that advice that you read out and try can actually undermine that sleep confidence if you're a hypervigilant sleeper. And then the sleep resilience is really about the degree to which we've internalized war and yin, and being able to understand that and realize that society is really creating expectations of us that are not conducive to sleep. And accepting there's an attitude shift there, of realizing that, it's up to us individually to protect ourselves and our families once you understand how important sleep is, and to just resist that pressure from outside to encroach on sleep in all the many ways in which that happens. So that's like a quick run around that.
I love it. And so, for everyone watching, what I loved about part of it, I thought for a second, well, this could be a Venn diagram, but I said, no, it's perfect. It's a star. Of course, it's a star. The night sky and sleeping is way better that it's a star. So can you scroll back to the big image, the first one that we saw?
The very first image at the
Yeah,
top.
the top one.
Yeah.
Okay, so now when you look at that image, oh, it's interesting. So we didn't do the staff.
Yeah, that's the health, and I actually I took that out of our presentation because
Okay. So,
I
so
just
there's more to know from Hilary. She's
yeah
more to
yeah
share.
yeah.
But so now I think, when you look at it, it's interesting because I could see putting that war on the yin yang there instead of the waves on that. If you were doing like
Okay.
you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
because then
Yeah.
we come back to it, and
Okay.
this is what you can do with presentation. Just sort of a pro tip is you might start with an image that seems a little like, what the hell is this? And then you break it down, and then you come back you at the parts, but then you come back to the whole later, and you say, now look at it. And they say, oh, now I see how these connect. How these relate to each other. And of course, it's also visually, it's in quarters, or with a thing in the middle. And it made, sometimes people look at it and they say, oh, actually it's more concentric circles, or this is more steps, or this is more, so that becomes part of the consideration of just that these things all get integrated, so that when you look at the one image, this is a mighty thing to be able to do, and this can take a long time, but could you have all of your work summed up in one image? I don't think it's shooting for the moon. It's not required. But if you could say, well, here's all the images, and kind of everything I'm going to talk about today is this, it's all here. The other thing I want to say is, I was trying to keep this, I said, maybe we can do it in half an hour, but of course not. But that's very telling of when you have a clear point of view, there's a lot to say. And so people will say, God, I can't have my sales letter be too long. But if the sales letter is too long because it's you pitching the thing the whole time and convincing people to buy, this isn't that compelling. If the sales letter is long, it's because there's point of view. There's just a lot to say about the point of view. There's a lot of education to give. If your workshop is 3 hours long because 2 hours is you trying to convince people to buy, that's no good. But if the workshop is you delving into it, and making the case for the perspective, that's a different story. I was interviewed a couple years ago, but a woman around point of view stuff, and she said, wow, I feel like you could just talk about this forever, or you could talk about this for hours. I looked at her, I just said, you should be able to talk about this for hours. You should be able to talk lucidly, clearly, in an articulated fashion about your point of view, in such a way that the more you speak, the more lucid it becomes, because we've all had the experience of somebody starts to talk about something, and the more they speak, the more confusing it is. Part of it is because they don't understand what the hell they're talking about, but it could be actually they understand all the parts, but they don't know how to bring them together, or they understand the big picture, but they don't understand the parts. And so the end result is you're sitting there just like, I have no idea what the hell you said at the end of it. And that's a devastation, because, in marketing, the confused mind says, no, it should be that when you finish speaking, it's just, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I rest my case. Boom. You've made a case for something that is solid, that it's plausible at the least and probable at the best. That people say, yeah, that makes sense as what could really be going on here. And that's, to me, the whole art in marketing, is you're not making the case for them to buy from you. You're making the case for a perspective, and basically saying, whether or not you buy from me, whether or not you ever come to me for help with your insomnia, here are the things I think you need to consider that are part of it. That's the fundamental and generous gesture in marketing, is this kind of education and relationship building in that way. So, Hilary, we got to wrap up. Thank you so much for taking your time and letting yourself be a guinea pig in this, and sharing the images you've come up with, and letting us wonder about this, letting people see it, because these case studies are so helpful. And so if people want to, people are struggling with sleep, having trouble with that, what do you have to offer? What would be the next steps for them to take?
Well, they could go to my website, asleepatlast.com. Yeah. So asleepatlast.com. If they go /sleep, they'll see more about just overcoming insomnia, and in my description of how one can do that. You know, if they want to contact me, they can there's a contact place. If they want to book me, they can find that at the bottom of the footer of the website. And I'd love to talk with them about sleep and anything that they need some help with. Thanks, Tad. Thanks for having me. It's been such a pleasure, and it's just fun to talk about your point of view. So thanks for listening.
Let me have that be the last button to end on.
Yeah.
Notice Hilary said, it's so much fun to talk about my point of view. But if I'd said, Hilary, could you come and let's schedule an hour. I want you to just, I don't know, do whatever you can to convince people to hire you. Hilary would have felt real awkward about that. Like, really? Like, isn't that strange? It's like, hey, I'll make a video. I'll email my whole list about it. You know, probably over 1,000 people will see it and check it out. So it's a great promo opportunity. And yet she would feel, and you would have felt terrible. You wouldn't have finished it, you know, that's a commercial.
Yeah.
But there's something about, if you talk about a message you're passionate about, if you talk about your point of view, this deals with so much of the awkwardness in marketing, so much of the fear we have, the resistance to, well, what are we resisting? It's sane. It makes sense. You're supposed to feel resistant to strong-arming people and manipulating people. That means you're a good human being. It means you have a conscience. There's nothing wrong with you for resisting that. And yet I find, and I'll do this in workshops, I say, you know, if I were to give all of you in the workshop a minute to come up here and convince us to hire you, and I can see, even though they know I'm joking, they know I'm about to say, but I'm not going to do that. I see all their bodies like, and then I say, we're not going to do that. And then they all laugh of relief. And I say, why are you relieved? I said, we might have just given you a minute to pitch your stuff, but nobody wants it. And nobody wants to hear it. But I said, what if I gave you a minute to come up and just talk about something you're passionate about, talk about this message that you have, this, you know, I said, Hilary, do you want to come up just 1 minute, like the whole war on the yin thing? Oh yeah. Like, I mean, maybe a little bit of stage fright, a little bit, you know, it's a group you don't know. And there's that, but that's different than, I fundamentally don't want to do this thing. I don't want to talk about this. So it's, the clearer you get about your point of view, the more excited you'll be to share it, the more you're going to want to, and the more you can, the more eloquent you'll become about it. And so it's if you feel weird about marketing, if marketing feels awkward, I would just admit that's a big reason why. Yeah. So there we go. Thank you, Hilary.
Thank you so much, Ted.
All right. Take care, everyone.